Okay. So, hi everyone and welcome. I'm Aisha B. Rahman. I'm the chair of the IEEE Women in Engineering Albuquerque Section Affinity Group, and I'm welcoming you all to our monthly public talk series. We would like to thank Dr. Theodora Chaspari, Assistant Professor in the Computer Science and Engineering Department at the Texas A&M University, for joining us today as our key speaker. Dr. Chaspari, um, has received her BS in Electrical and Computer Engineering from the National Technical University of Athens, Greece, and her MS and PhD in Electrical Engineering from the University of Southern California. Between 2010 and 2017, she was a research assistant at the Signal Analysis and Interpretation Laboratory at USC. So Dr. Theodora's research interests lie in human-centered machine learning, effective computing, and biomedical health informatics. And today she will be discussing the topic vocal and linguistic analysis of microbehaviors in diverse team interactions. So thank you so much for making time out of your very busy schedule to join us. I'd like to pass it down to Dr. Tsiropoulos, advisor of our affinity group, to say a few words before we start the talk.
Thank you, Aisha. Thank you, Dr. Chaspari, for joining with your talk, our affinity group. It's a great pleasure and honor. We always try to have keynote speeches from young engineers that are really role models for our students, and we appreciate it for taking the time. So I don't really want to take more time from your talk, so the floor is yours, and we are very happy to have you with us.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tsiropoulos and Aisha. It's really great to be here today, and thank you so much for the invitation. My presentation today is going to be about a project that we have in our lab that is about diverse team interactions and how we can quantify behaviors of interest in diverse team interactions and actually potentially identify which behaviors of interest might influence team outcomes down the road. And since this is an IEEE engineering chapter, and it's a women in IEEE chapter, I just wanted to take a few minutes to just describe my research path from my undergraduate studies to here. Back when I was an undergraduate, my research was mostly on signal processing and on speech processing. And I had this opportunity to do my research on on speech-based emotion recognition. And then at that point, I realized, how much signal processing was so interesting. Signal processing was definitely more exciting at that point, a very long time ago, almost 15, 16 years ago now. And I realized how math is actually embedded in signal processing and how we can use mathematical formulations in order to make meaning out of real world behaviors. So that was so exciting to me. And I went to this professor and I asked him for this undergraduate research position. And he was kind enough to provide that. So then my thesis was about speech-based emotion recognition. And then following that, during my PhD, so the data that was collected back then was from active speech data. And then during my PhD, I started looking more into naturalistic interactions between people in data that were more realistic and made more sense in real life. And at that point, one of the first research-grade wearable devices were into place. That was the Q sensor from Affectiva. And then I started focusing more on signal processing for physiological data. Also, dictionary learning was very hot at that point. So my research papers were focusing into this. So finally, after that, towards the end of my PhD, deep learning and machine learning became the buzzword. And then we tried to see how we can incorporate multimodal data into making sense of human behavior, into predicting and estimating human outcomes. So this overall theme of human-centered machine intelligence started from the realm of signal processing, and then it kind of transferred more and moved more into machine learning. And finally, as a junior faculty, in the last years, we have been looking with my research team aspects about trustworthiness and responsibility in human-centered machine intelligence, and how beyond having models that yield a good performance, how can we make this model trustworthy to stakeholders? Just a brief introduction about this research. Since we have really recently shifted into a data-driven society, in which signal analytics and AI have become seamlessly interconnected into our lives, it's becoming more and more necessary to, first of all, understand how AI can positively impact our lives, but also to identify the risks that are associated with deploying AI into the real world. We need to understand how humans perceive these risks, and us as researchers, we need to understand and ensure that the development of AI is being conducted in a responsible and ethical manner. And at the same time, interactions between humans and AI are increasingly evolving in collaborative relationships in which humans and AI can work side by side for important and sensitive decision-making tasks. So it's becoming more and more apparent that we have to better understand the dynamics of this interaction, and we have to actually ensure that we design AI that does not only replicate, but also augments human capabilities. So having said that, the overall goal of my research lab is to address challenges that are associated with human-centered and trustworthy AI. So we are working across 4 main aspects of this. The first is robustness. So how can we design machine learning models that are generalizable across different populations? And how can we actually ensure that machine learning models integrate contextual information, especially when we're talking about real life data, in order to make sense out of the decisions? Since we are really working on sensitive data, because we are working on multimodal data that include speech, language, video, we are very much also concerned about privacy. So we are trying to identify what are privacy risks, what are places in the data that might leak sensitive and personally identifiable information, and how can we mitigate those risks. And finally, recently, given all the interest that the machine learning research community had on fairness and algorithmic bias, we have been also trying to understand in which ways bias, and specifically demographic bias, can creep into these machine learning models. So our applications are mostly related to mental health and public health, as well as workforce training and reskilling. So specifically for workforce training and reskilling, we have been working on identifying factors of trust in human-AI interaction, on assistive intelligent technologies for public speaking presentations and interviews. And the last 2 years, we have been working on a very exciting topic, at least to me, that it is related to team science. And specifically, we have been working on how we can model behaviors in teams that might be of interest and might influence the team members, as well as the overall team performance. So without taking into much time into this introduction, recently, of course, we know the need of having diverse teams. Diverse teams can bring multiple perspectives, can bring people's different livings, different experiences, diversity of opinions. And we're not necessarily talking only about demographic diversity, but also diversity in expertise. So diverse teaming really brings opportunities for approaching problems from different perspectives and inspiring novel ideas. However, there is always this risk, especially when we bring people from diverse backgrounds, about inadequate cooperation and coordination within a team. And research in industrial psychology has identified various factors that can affect team functioning. So, for example, these factors can include the emergent states within a team, such as what is the level of communication, what is the mood of the team members, whether conflict has occurred within team members, and as well as other factors, such as the leadership approach within a team and the training that the team has received in order to conduct the necessary tasks of interest. However, some factors that have been really understudied in prior work are factors that have to do with these moment-to-moment interpersonal interactions that can go within teams. And these moment-to-moment interpersonal interactions, first of all, they are very difficult to capture. The reason for that is that team assessment is usually being conducted retrospectively, either via self-reports or via measuring an aggregate level of task performance throughout some portion of the team interaction. And these moment-to-moment behaviors that might be dyadic or among more than two team members and might be more subtle are not explored that much. So what we're trying to do here is that we're trying to use multimodal data to, first of all, quantify interactions within teams. And second of all, explore what we will call micro behaviors, that we're going to actually define some of these micro behaviors that might be of interest for ensuring that a team can actually have better functioning outcomes and better cooperation and coordination. I would like to take a moment here to acknowledge the collaborators that we have been working together for the past 2 years in these studies. When we're going to present 2 case studies here, one case study that is about teaming in space missions, and our collaborators there have been Dr. Suzanne Bell, Sidney Begerovsky, and Ala Hander from the NASA Johnson Space Center. And the graduate student that has been working in these studies is Prasna Paromita. And finally, as part of the second study, which is about teaming in the context of STEM and how we can model student interactions, first and second year in engineering student interactions within teams. This is kind of a very preliminary work that we have done, and Cara Berry, who is an undergraduate student at Texas A&M, has led part of this work. So let's start with our first case study. And our first case study is about space exploration. And recently, there has been, of course, the need to have diverse teams when we are exploring space. And diverse teams can be in terms of biological sex, race, ethnicity, different cultural backgrounds, different languages, and also different domain expertise. So we have within a mission, we can have members that are prior military and members that are scientists. So space exploration is definitely a very cognitively and physically demanding task, and it requires coordination among team members for surviving in a very hostile environment. Current efforts to quantify team performance and team functioning in these types of settings mostly rely on self-reports. And we know that self-reports have the risk of subjectivity and also recall bias. So one potential way to mitigate this and to get more insights about the different facets and subtle facets of team interaction is to actually record team interactions and try to analyze team interactions via the audiovisual recordings. And the second case study is about interpersonal interactions in STEM. So specifically in STEM, while there has been a lot of work that has focused on perseverance factors that are related to student attributes, such as academic proficiency, motivation, previous training, access to STEM courses and support services, there has been been little work, and again, this work has been mostly done in terms of interviews and self-reports about the interpersonal factors that might affect perseverance of minoritized students in STEM. So we are very much interested there also in understanding what are these subtle interactions that might occur between students and might actually potentially discourage students from persisting in their STEM trajectories. And what we're going to mostly focus in this presentation are what we will call microbehaviors. So microbehaviors have been examined fairly widely in social studies. And a definition of microbehaviors refers to subtle linguistic and paralinguistic indicators of thinking and feeling towards another member of the team. Microbehaviors have very much studied in the context of different subgroups. So there has been a lot of established work on racial microbehaviors and gendered microbehaviors. For this purpose, we are going to define two types of microbehaviors, what we will call negative and positive microbehaviors. So in the definition of negative microbehaviors, we're going to refer to those as indignities towards a target member of the team. And these behaviors can be exclusionary. They can create barriers to belongingness to the team and can also put down the target status. Basically, they can render the target status demeaning to the other team members. Now, on the opposite side, and of course, as we can understand, negative microbehaviors can be actually detrimental to team performance, especially when they occur on a frequent basis. On the opposite side of this, positive microbehaviors can actually uplift the target's uplift the target's behavior, and they can promote inclusiveness and belongingness to the team. And that can be done by affirming the target's status or their competitiveness, or enabling them to actually achieve their goals. And we're going to provide here a few examples of positive and negative microbehaviors. Examples of negative microbehaviors are a refusal of joint activity that might be continuously going on throughout the task interaction. Other examples of negative microbehaviors are one's ideas or opinions being minimized, ignored, or people really not providing, not giving value to the target member's ideas. Very common examples that have been studied in the literature are acidic humor, sarcastic comments, or offensive stories, as well as language that includes the name of a subgroup, especially for our space exploration task. A very common language that might be used is a reservist, that refers to a member of the military that has not really been deployed. On the contrary side, positive microbehaviors can be a result of information sharing. So, for example, if a team is trying to solve a problem and somebody is actively seeking input from a team member in order to hear their opinion, this would eventually mean that they would value their opinion. Another example is to follow up with a question to understand one's perspective and one's opinion. Potentially to acknowledge one's success. This is a very common example that we have seen. And also to recognize one's experiences. So there has been some prior work in this context of both detecting subtle behaviors and specifically negative behaviors for language, as well as in terms of quantifying and modeling team performance. So specifically, language-based detection of negative behaviors has been conducted very much in the context of social media and in the context of written speech. There, the NLP community has extensively studied the automatic detection of toxic comments and hate speech. There has been a very recent work about the automatic detection of microaggressions, again, mostly based on social media. And in terms of predicting team functioning outcomes from multimodal data, there has been some work that has been conducted in the context of affective computing. Specifically, this work is mostly centered on aggregating multimodal data and via this aggregation, predicting team performance and team functioning at the end. While in contrast, what we are going to try to do here is to identify at the turn-based level what might be types of behaviors that might contribute either positively or negatively to team functioning. And we are also going to try to automatically detect micro behaviors, both positive micro behaviors and negative micro behaviors, based on data that does not rely on social media, but data that relies on interpersonal interactions, and essentially speech that is being uttered is not a written speech. So let's start into our first study here. So our first study is in collaboration with our partners at the NASA Johnson Space Center, and we have obtained data that contain what we call HERA campaigns 4 and 5. And what are these HERA campaigns is that instead of actually having people and experimenting in real space explorations, NASA has created a research analog that simulates long mission space exploration, and this is here on Earth. So you can see in this part, this is an example of the HERA space, and teams go to this space for pretty much a month, 45 days, and they would conduct tasks as they would do in space missions. So that would be a continuous space exploration. They would do their tasks as they would normally do in space missions, and they would sleep and eat as they would do in these missions. We have data from 9 teams. Each team had 4 members, and each team was participated in a mission for 45 days. Data were recorded from both microphones and cameras. For the purpose of these studies, we are solely looking at speech data that were recorded as part of these missions, and we are focusing on key activities, and specifically 3 key activities. One activity is what we call team interaction battery. So these have been problem-solving activities that have been assigned by the mission control in order to help simulate space exploration. And also we have been working on the daily planning conference, which is a daily meeting of the team to organize their tasks, and on meals, since meals provide more informal interactions, and types of micro behaviors can actually occur both in formal interactions, such as team interaction battery, as well as in informal interactions, such as the meals. So what we have done based on this data is that we have extracted a set of linguistic and acoustic features that can be that we stipulate that they can be relevant of the quality of interactions that occur during these missions, and also of the nature of interactions that might be occurring during these missions. So first of all, we have used lexicon analysis, and lexicons are predefined, include predefined set of words that are assigned to specific categories. So for example, we have used what we call look features, and look refers to linguistic inquiry and word count dictionary. And what these features do is that they contain a set of predefined words that might refer to linguistic processes, psychological processes, and cognitive processes. It is a very it's a very commonly used tool in domains such as affective computing, in psychology. While it usually takes into account word at the unit level, it has been effectively used in the past in prior work. And we are also using what we call StressNet features. And StressNet was a dictionary, a lexicon that was constructed by NASA specific to NASA missions. Now, in addition to this more knowledge-driven approach, we were also very much interested in using more up-to-date approaches from NLP, and therefore we used language bendings that were built based on the paraphrase dataset. And finally, we extracted acoustic features. Acoustic features do not really capture the language content of a turn, but they capture the intonation and prosody of a turn. So these features include energy-based features, frequency-based features, and spectral features. And you can see here a few indicative examples of these features. Finally, because we are not only modeling individual performance, but we are modeling team interaction, one way to do that is to model similarity between consecutive turns of different speakers. And there has been a prior work that indicates that turn similarity can be indicative of interesting behaviors, either behaviors that are related to agreement or disagreement throughout an interaction. So we have measured the cosine similarity between speakers in terms of the vectors that are defined from the lexicon-based features, the vectors that are defined from the language bendings, and the vectors that are defined from the acoustic features. So after we pre-processed our data and we extracted our features, we went ahead to conduct this more exploratory analysis to see essentially how do some of these features look like in the context of micro behaviors. And these are some interesting results that we got. We compared positive micro behaviors with no micro behaviors, that was the control condition, and negative micro behaviors with, again, no micro behaviors via a statistical significance test. And we saw some interesting things here. So first of all, we saw that negative micro behaviors include an increased use of passive voice. One potential reason for that is that we know from the literature that negative micro behaviors tend to be quite subtle. And we also know that passive voice reflects subtlety and not direct meaning. So that might be one potential reason why negative micro behaviors depict an increased use of passive voice compared to the turns that do not include any micro behavior. We expected that negative micro behaviors would include increased angry language, but this is something that we did not see, and that might be an additional reason, and a reason for that might be, again, the subtlety of micro behaviors. Maybe when people are expressing a negative micro behavior, they do not very much rely on this angry language, but maybe this negative micro behavior is expressed in a more subtle way. Another thing that was quite interesting for us was that negative micro behaviors depicted a decreased turn similarity among speakers. And this is very much in line with literature on conflict that we know from interpersonal interactions. And finally, we saw an increased pitch, an increased fundamental frequency, increased vocal pitch during the use of negative micro behaviors. We know that vocal pitch increases in high arousal emotions. So that might be a subtle change in acoustic descriptors that might be reflected when somebody is expressing a negative micro behavior. Now, on the other side, we saw that positive micro behaviors included an increased use of positive affect, an increased use of language that is related to achievement, which is something that we expected, since we had actually coded those micro behaviors for that, and also an increased turn similarity between consecutive speakers. I also wanted to mention here that micro behaviors were coded by our psychology, by our experts from psychological sciences, and they were inter-annotator agreement was measured and examined for this coding. So moving a little bit more into the modeling side, after we obtained some insights about the nature of microbehaviors, we wanted to go more into the modeling side. So we wanted to see how can we actually use and potentially adapt existing natural language processing models in order to automatically detect microbehaviors in our transcripts and audio data based on the features that we had extracted. So for this, first of all, we used a few baseline systems. So we used an LSTM system in which we just added the speakers, the sender speakers input features as an input. We also used another baseline system in which we had the features from both the sender of the microbehavior and the target of microbehavior as an input that interacted with each other. And the reason for that was that when a microbehavior occurs, we anticipate that the answer of the one who is receiving the microbehavior or potentially any other member of the team would also be related to that specific instance. In addition to that, because of the subtlety of microbehaviors, we further we were very much interested into modeling the context throughout the interaction. So we were very much interested in modeling the co-occurring task that was going on through that interaction. And by task, we mean what was the type of the mission discussion, whether that was a relational interaction between team members or a transition period. And we were also very much interested in modeling the underlying sentiment throughout the dialogue, because we anticipate that the underlying sentiment, whether this is positive or negative, would actually moderate the occurrence of microbehaviors. So here you can see a model that was adapted from dialogue systems. And in this model, we can see, first of all, that we have the acoustic and linguistic data from the target and the acoustic and linguistic data from the interacting team members. And these embeddings are, first of all, interacting with each other, and they are also interacting with the context-based task and dialogue information that we have for our data. So these contextual variables are used here to encode the specific task that is occurring throughout the interaction at that point, and the sentiment information that the sentiment information. The sentiment information is being automatically detected via a publicly available toolbox here. So once we have this interaction between the team members, as well as the additional information about the context, we apply a few further transformations based on our dialogue system, and we get a probability of occurrence of either a positive microbehavior, a negative microbehavior, or none of the two. So essentially, we're looking at a three-class classification problem, where the chance accuracy here is 33% when we are looking at balanced accuracy. So let's go a little bit and check our results. First of all, here we see the results that we get using the acoustic and linguistic features with a simple classifier, with a simple random forest classifier, without using all these more complex neural networks. So first of all, we see from these results that the language features, these look-based language features that reflect the use of linguistic and psychological processes that occur in the dialogue, perform on average very good, and better than the lexicon-based features that were used using StressNet. One potential reason for that is also that the look features have twice the dimensionality of the StressNet features. The acoustic features themselves can perform well to some extent, but definitely there is a lot of linguistic information that needs to complement those acoustic features. We tried to see whether the combination of linguistic and acoustic information would yield better results compared to the linguistic information alone, but we did not see any improvement on that. One potential reason for that is that we might need to do a little bit more additional pre-processing on our acoustic features, because this is quite a noisy environment. So we might need to further pre-process the audio data in order to yield information that might be supplementary to the linguistic information. We also saw that the term similarity features on their own actually are pretty good. If you consider the fact that these are only 3 features, these are pretty good. And we also saw that consistently among the majority of the cases, when we use in our model features that are extracted from both the target and the sender of the micro behavior, we get improved results compared to just using features from the sender only. And this is something that we anticipate is integrating contextual information from the response of the target, the person who is receiving the micro behavior, would actually have valuable insight, would actually give to the model valuable insight about what's going on in that turn. And now here we have our results that look at the comparison of the 4 systems that we developed. So as a reminder here, system 1 is the LSTM in which we only use sender features as an input. System 2 is the LSTM that we use the feature embeddings from both the sender and the target of micro behavior. And we see that, as we expected, system 2 works better than system 1. In system 3, this is our system that is inspired by the dialogue-based systems from NLP, in which we integrate information about the task that is occurring throughout that interaction. And in system 4, we are integrating information both about the task and the sentiment. So we see that the F1 score in system 4 is overall highest compared to the other 3 systems, which potentially indicate that to some extent integrating context information on the task and the co-occurring sentiment could actually help in the detection of micro behaviors. And the fact that we expect that these behaviors are subtle, integrating contextual information could potentially be beneficial for the automatic detection of these micro behaviors. We have a few more things to discuss about this, but maybe that's a good time to pause and see if anybody has any questions or any clarification questions. Yes.
Well, anyone, if you don't have a mic, you can use the chat as well.
Does this mic work? Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, I was wondering, how do you weed out observation bias from your study? Because when people are observed and they're going to put their best foot forward. So they're not going to be as when they're not observed. So how can you identify that in your signal, or is there a correction mechanism that you apply on your signals to identify that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And of course, we know that people, when they are observed, of course, they are trying to be more attentive and they're trying to be mindful of their behaviors. In this study, the thing is that people were together for 45 days. So they were continuously together for 45 days. And that, like, while in the first few days, maybe people were more mindful about their behavior, it's really difficult for them to be mindful throughout the mission. So yeah. And actually, we saw, I think that's also, that finding also, one reason that this makes sense is also because we saw that some teams performed very well, but some teams had problems. So people at some point stopped putting their best foot there. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Theodora. Thank you very much.
Of course, thank you. Okay, and feel free to add any thoughts or discussions in the chat as well. So then, after having pretty much really barely scratched the surface on this, we wanted to see whether by using data and linguistic data from this occurrence of micro behaviors, whether this might be helpful in predicting team functioning and team performance at the end of some of these days. And this is particularly useful, especially in the context of the domain that we are working on, because what happens is that with the new Artemis mission and the Moon mission and Mars missions, communications between the actual spaceship and the Earth are not going to be continuous. So it is very interesting to try to understand how we can use some of these data analytics technologies to provide independent feedback to astronauts. And of course, as long as these technologies are validated and we know that they work well. So essentially what we have done here is that we have performance measures from each team 4 times throughout their mission. And we wanted to see whether the behaviors that are occurring, the linguistic, whether the behaviors, the micro behaviors, or the behaviors that are occurring throughout the past days, whether this would affect the team performance at the end of each batch of days. So for that, we used a statistical model, a linear mixed effects model, to account for the multiple measurements that we had per team. The dependent variable of that model was the performance of team I at day J. And we used as independent variables linguistic markers, basically linguistic features that were extracted at the turn level. And these were mainly look features that reflect affective, cognitive, and physical processes in a turn. And we used terms that are related to positive microbehaviors, negative microbehaviors, and some instances we used all terms. So these are some very indicative results. Psyche is actually working on this paper right now. So these are kind of very preliminary results. But something interesting that we saw here, for example, was that the performance of the team is associated with the amount of positive emotion, the percentage of positive emotion that is reflected through a positive microbehavior turn, and the percentage of negative emotion that is reflected through a negative microbehavior turn. So essentially what this says is that we saw an increase in performance when the team members expressed more positive language in the positive microbehavior, and we saw a decrease in performance through this coefficient here when the team members expressed increased negative language in the negative microbehavior. A few more things that we also found that might have been interesting were about cognitive processes. Since there is all this problem solving that goes in teams, we wanted to see some linguistic markers that might be related to cognitive processes, such as discrepancies, language that is related to certainty. So these are words such as really, actually, of course, and language that might be related to differentiation. So essentially that would be language that might include words such as but, not, if, or. So what we found here was that we found a decrease in performance when there was an increased use of words that were associated with discrepancy. And discrepancy related words are examples of these were would, could, can, want. And we saw an increase in performance when there was more language that was associated with certainty, such as actually, of course, really. Finally, we also wanted to take a look at physical processes that might be discussed throughout the interaction. So based on the measurements that we could get from Luke, we analyzed 3 physical processes together: words that are related to food, words that are related to body, and words that have a reference to sex. So what we found here was that we saw an increase in performance when teams discussed more about food, which maybe makes sense because food is really a great topic to discuss. So teams that felt potentially happy with each other and relaxed with each other, maybe had more discussions about that. We also saw a decrease in performance when there has been reference that has been related to sex. And finally, something that we also kind of expected was that we saw an increase in performance when we had words that were related to a reward, such as words related to win, gain, benefit. And that's potentially expected because of the nature of the performance task and the nature of the linguistic measurement that is related to a reward. So after conducting this initial analysis, what we wanted to do is that we wanted to design machine learning algorithms that would, first of all, capture the team interaction and the interaction of linguistic markers among team members, as well as the time evolution of linguistic markers within each team member and throughout the team. So here we thought that graph neural networks are a great example that can actually capture these types of interactions, because graph neural networks have been designed specifically to capture interactions between neighboring nodes. And in our case, we have defined each team member as a node of the neural network. We have defined the edges of our graph as the percentage of interactions between each pairwise combination of team members. And that's a directional graph because from A to C, this is the percentage of interactions that go from team member A to team member C and vice versa. And then in addition to that, we added a time-based component into this via looking at the evolution of the embeddings that we get from the graph neural networks. So first of all, our input features here were word embeddings that were extracted from the BERT model. In each graph of the neural network, we, as a feature, we used the BERT embedding from the specific team member. And after we got a transformation of that embedding through each node, we stacked those embeddings and then we used an LSTM in order to model the time evolution among speakers and within each speaker. So at the end, the output of our network was a performance outcome. And in that specific case, we binarized the team-based performance outcome into a high performance and a low performance. And we had various multiple performance measures per team. So we conducted here an ablation study in which, as part of the baseline 1, we modeled only the temporal information via the LSTMs without using the graph neural network. And as part of baseline 2, we modeled only the graph neural network, only the interaction between team members, without using the temporal information. And as expected, we saw that the model that quantifies both temporal information and interaction between team members provides the best results. You can see here actually that the results that we get are really, while they're significantly higher than chance, they are not much higher than chance. And the reason for that might be that there might be so many other confounding factors that might affect team performance here, that these moment-to-moment interactions might be one factor, but there might be more variability that comes into the data. We might need to also model individual differences across teams, or we might also need to model contextual information that has been modeled in our previous work, and that might also contribute to team performance. So in order to summarize some of our findings in this study, so first of all, what we found was that linguistic and acoustic features can be indicative of the presence of the microbehavior. To some extent, we saw that through statistical analysis and through our analysis with machine learning experiments. We saw something quite interesting to us, that the subtlety of negative microbehaviors is reflected in types of features that for some that are also more subtle. such as the use of passive voice or the use of vocal pitch, or the use of similarity measures between speakers. We found that integrating context is effective, and integrating information from both the sender and the target of microbehavior is also effective. And we also found that isolating the linguistic context of the microbehavior within a turn can, to some extent, effectively predict team performance, but of course, this doesn't give us the whole story. So as part of our future work, first of all, what we are trying to do here is that something that is completely missing from these behaviors are visual data. There is a lot of information and also subtle information in the visual cues that might not be reflected here. We are trying, our collaborators are also trying to code micro behaviors throughout the missions in order to get more labeled data for this. And we are also trying to understand to what extent we could potentially model different parts of the mission, and to what extent these different parts of the mission would be more or less predictive of team performance. If you have more questions, if you have any questions, I would be happy to discuss through, feel free to add them in the chat, or feel free to interrupt me. So in this second part of the talk, which is briefer because this is a more recent study that we have been doing here at Texas A&M, we wanted to see how we can adapt some of the findings or some of the technical knowledge that we got from our space mission project to actual interactions between students in the academic context. And when it comes to the academic context, we are very much interested in our own domain, in engineering and STEM in general, because interpersonal interactions within students in STEM have not been examined so thoroughly, and there has been some prior work that has examined these interactions through self-reports and through interviews, but we are very much interested to see what's going on in these interactions. So essentially, we are conducting a study here at Texas A&M, and in this study, we are collecting data from team interactions, and we are trying to see to what extent through this data, first of all, we can design acoustic and linguistic markers of team outcomes. And then on a second stage, what we are trying to do is that we are trying to code that data in terms of micro behaviors and try to see whether we can design analytical methods for automatically detecting those micro behaviors. So far, we have collected data from 3 teams. 2 teams consisted of 3 students and 1 team consisted of 4 students. And we wanted to specifically focus on gender, on potentially gender-based microbehaviors. So for this reason, our teams either included 1 female and 2 male participants, or 2 female and 2 male participants. All students were from engineering in our study, all 10 students, and they were first or second year of undergrad. And the reason for this was that we wanted to get people with different programming levels, because our cognitive task that we are conducting throughout the study is a programming task. Students were recruited via Tamil mailing lists, and they were given, once they enrolled in the study, they were given pseudonyms to protect their confidentiality, and they had a collaboration throughout 5 days of their choice in order to solve assigned programming questions. These collaborations were online in order to simulate more emerging online collaboration environments that actually students might face in their daily lives. So this is the protocol of our data. In the beginning, students completed a set of surveys that captures individual difference measures, such as personality, stressful life events, and resilience. They conducted the study over 5 days, the majority of the teams, and in each day they had 2 problem-solving tasks, so these problem-solving tasks, and after each task, each person had to report the perceived positive affect, negative affect, stress, and team function. At the end, students, each of the participants who participated in the study, they were debriefed about the purpose of the study. And their study was approved by the Texas A&M Institutional Review Board. So a few preliminary results that HERA got here as part of her undergraduate thesis was that we found that when we started to analyze the data and analyze some of the linguistic aspects of the data, we found that participants who self-reported increased stress had more non-fluencies, increased amount of analytical thinking, more reference to friends, and more reference to male-based words. We also found that participants who reported higher positive affect had more references about achievement and had more words that depicted a focus towards the present. And in relation to conflict management, we found that successful conflict management included words of emotional tone, while unsuccessful conflict management included words that were mostly related with swearing. These are, again, some very preliminary results. At this point, we're collecting more data. We are also trying, in collaboration with experts from social sciences, to design a behavioral coding manual to code the occurrence of microbehaviors, to define microbehaviors in that specific context, and also code their occurrence throughout the data before we start really exploring these more quantitative aspects. So, a few final thoughts here on how some of these analytical methods and machine learning methods could be potentially used to promote diverse teaming. So the insights from our analysis, and this is something that we have been working and discussing back and forth with our experts from psychological and social sciences. One way to use these insights is to inform targeted intervention strategies. One potential way to do that is through micro-video training, especially in our space exploration analog. Doing a micro-video training can help people realize their behaviors and acknowledge the presence of either the positive or the negative microbehavior, so that they can potentially increase the positive ones and mitigate the negative ones. And this can also help team members and direct them into concrete actions that they can do in order to promote their team functioning. However, there are all these ethical considerations that go into the design of these technologies. These ethical considerations are quite important. As researchers, we are trying to be in open dialogue with stakeholders, people who are going to use these technologies, and people from human sciences in order to potentially find solutions to some of these. So one question that we have been really dealing with is how to handle erroneous predictions. For example, if we have a false alarm of a negative microbehavior, how to handle this, right? This is really important. How to compensate for negative microbehaviors that have not been detected. What are acceptable performance thresholds, especially for these very sensitive machine learning methods and very sensitive algorithms that really define team interactions? In addition to that, there are also HCI related questions. So, for example, how can the technology communicate some of the negative microbehaviors or the positive microbehaviors, but especially for the negative ones, and to whom? Is it going to be the sender? Is it going to be the target? Who is going to be that person who's going to receive that information? So with that, I would like to conclude this presentation. And here are some pictures from all the people, from some of the people in our lab. This is Psyche, who has helped significantly with her work on microbehavior detection. And here are some other lab members. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Chaspari. I have a question for you. I wanted to ask you if during the study of your linguistic and vocal markers for microbehavior, detecting microbehaviors, let's say, did you consider any impact of cultural differences?
Aisha, that's a great question. At the NASA exploration, we tried to, so the teams culturally, we had, of course, English speakers, so we had native speakers, but there was a difference in the cultural background in terms of whether people were from a military background or from a scientific background. So that was very different, very interesting to us, and we tried to see when observing the data. It was very interesting because even the linguistic content of these two subgroups might actually differ. We had tried in some of the preliminary analysis to add these components, this information as additional inputs into our models. We did not get any significant improvements in performance. That's why these results are not actually reported here. I don't know. I don't think it's because it doesn't matter. I think maybe because we don't have enough variability maybe among teams, right? It's only 9 teams. So essentially 9 times 4, 36 team members. And I definitely think that in the context of STEM, integrating cultural differences in terms of different cultural backgrounds, this is really important and really worth studying. But we haven't done this yet, but it's really worth studying.
Thank you so much.
Of course, thank you.
Okay, there's someone that has raised her hand.
Thank you again, Theodora, for this great talk. I have one more question. You analyze the qualitative interactions between team members, and then you use network graph theory to analyze further with AI. I had the question whether without the qualitative information, whether the network itself tells you something about the team interaction, in the sense, for example, if you have like a more ergodic interactions, does it mean more a healthy team, or we observe strong nexus and isolation of nodes? That would mean that maybe bullying or this kind of behaviors are going on.
That's a great question. We haven't done this analysis yet. However, there has been prior work, not from our lab, that has done similar analysis. And they have found actually what you're saying, Stavroula, that the structure of the network actually can mean something about the overall team outcome, which is actually very interesting if you think about it.
Thank you very much, Theodora. This is a really great research. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So Ari, you can unmute your mic, I guess.
Hi. I wanted to ask you more of a general question regarding like how you came across this field of study, or like what motivated you to go through all this.
Yeah. Thank you, Ari. That's a great question. I think that was really random. Everything was kind of randomly happened. I took a signal processing class. I liked the content. The advisor was great. And I thought, okay, that's very interesting. And then I went to my undergraduate thesis. But actually what motivated me initially was the fact that in signal processing, I could see how math can be applied in order to simulate real life behaviors, such as speech behaviors, such as facial expressions. And that really fascinated me. And that's how I became interested in this.
Thank you.
So thank you, Theodora. The talk was really great. I mean, honestly, I wasn't familiar at all with the topic, so I was very impressed how you can use practically it's data modeling and AI in order practically to interpret how humans behave and interact among each others and create a context out of that. It's really great. I don't really have a question. I want to take the opportunity to thank you once again for joining the group. We are a relatively small group, but we try to grow up, to grow actually, and maybe grow up as well. So I appreciate it very much that you took the time, and we're all very happy to have you here.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me, and it has been really great, and it was really a very nice afternoon with everybody. I really appreciate the invitation and your kind hospitality. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think it's getting late over there, right?
It's 7:30, but thankfully it's still bright.
Oh, it's still right there. Yeah, this daylight saving.
Yeah.
So thank you
Very
so
nice
much
to
again.
meet you. Thank you for everything.
It was also a pleasure to meet you, and thank you so much for your very wonderful talk. And hopefully we will see you again.
Yes,
Hopefully.
yes. Thank you, Aisha. Thank you, Rini. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye. Have a great night.
Bye-bye. Have a great night, everyone. Bye-bye.